My dad slept with my fiancée and got her pregnant. Now they expect me to raise the baby. My existence took a drastic turn, and I needed to get it off my chest. Buckle up and get the popcorn ready, because the story gets pretty complicated. I met in 24 in my freshman year of college. We lived in the same dorm building, although I was a year older. We met at a forced event organized by the RA. That meeting where they push you to socialize while they serve cheap punch and stale cookies? The one I attended only because my roommate insisted I needed to interact instead of spending the weekend playing Call of Duty. While I was bored, a girl appeared who undoubtedly caught my attention. Long dark hair, a charming smile, and killer legs. When we both reached for the last decent cookie on the snack table, we started talking and discovered that we actually lived very close, in towns barely 2 blocks away. From then on, every time we went home during breaks, I would drive her in my car. It is amazing what you can learn about someone when you are trapped in a car for 3 hours. After spending a lot of time together, both at university and on those trips, we started dating. We both have a very close relationship with our families, so it did not take long for us to tell them about us. I had already met her parents previously when I drove her home. It was a brief "how are you," which, despite being fleeting, left me with the impression that they were decent people. Her father was a quiet man who worked in construction, and her mother, a teacher. When I introduced her to my parents, my mother went all out preparing a spectacular dinner, with new tablecloths and everything necessary, while my father, Walter, 52, seemed excessively excited to meet her. I have always known that my father has a habit of flirting at will when my mother is not paying attention, something I used to attribute to guy things. When he met in, the first thing he said was, "So, this is the girl who has my boy starry-eyed." My mother gave him a withering look, but said nothing. Well, our families generally got along well. I simply thought she is half his age and went on with my life. After graduating, I returned home to work at a local factory. It was not a glamorous job, but it paid the bills and offered me benefits. Plus, on the assembly line, working with sheet metal, I met decent colleagues with whom we sometimes went out for drinks after our shift and gossiped about the supervisors. My father always needed to be the center of attention at family gatherings, showing off his latest acquisitions, whether it was a motorcycle, a boat, or some midlife crisis gadget. With receding hair and tight polos that were meant to highlight a gym he barely used, he never missed an opportunity to tell stories of his glory days, making sure and heard them. "You should have seen me at your age," he used to say, recalling how he almost became a professional in his time. And that caused me both laughter and comments from my friends, who said that my father was still trying to show that he still has it. I remember that once, at a downtown bar, a friend of mine, Marcus, saw him buying drinks for women who were not even close to my mother's age. Marcus commented, "Your old man is a lost cause. Those guys never change." I took it badly, but I already knew that it was simply Walter being Walter, and my mother, with 30 years of marriage, knew exactly how to handle him. We lived together for 3 years before I proposed to him. I took her to a lake, the place of our first real date after I came home, and at sunset, I knelt down. She accepted between tears and smiles. We immediately began planning the wedding, scheduled for the following summer. We booked the venue, and AN's parents offered to help financially, something I greatly appreciated. I must admit that, back then, I was so absorbed in my 10-hour shifts and dreaming about our future that I ignored many red flags. For example, my father started calling in constantly. At first, I thought it was sweet that he made sure she felt welcome in the family, but it soon became strange. Instead of contacting me, he preferred to call her when he needed something. I remember one time when, while I was showering, her phone rang. I answered, and he, realizing it, was surprised and somewhat irritated. He commented something about my mother's birthday present, and after hanging up, when I told him, she had an unusual reaction, quickly changing the subject and asking me what I wanted for dinner. Another change I noticed was that, approximately 6 months ago, she started going to the gym almost daily, in contrast to her previous visits, which used to be sporadic with her friend. And suddenly it became very important to her. She bought tight sportswear she had never worn before, and even dyed her hair blonde, from a brown tone. She even started wearing makeup on weekends when we were at the apartment. I once joked, "Do you have a secret boyfriend?" And although she laughed forcefully, her expression told me something was not right. The most disconcerting episode occurred one afternoon when I finished my workday early. as we had completed a large order ahead of schedule. I heard the shower running at 4:30, much earlier than usual. I called for her, but she did not answer. Perhaps the sound of the water prevented her from hearing me. When she came out, with only a towel, she was surprised, almost irritated, to see me, and explained that she had gone to the gym after work to unwind, although her gym bag had mysteriously disappeared. The strangest thing was the way Anne behaved in my father's presence in public. She used to make little mocking comments, calling him old man or laughing at his hairline. However, when the three of us were alone, she became extremely quiet and nervous, laughing at his jokes and fixing her hair as soon as he appeared. On one occasion, during Sunday dinner at my parents' house, I went to help my mother with the dishes. When I returned, I found them sitting very close together on the sofa, looking at something on my father's phone. When they saw me, they immediately separated, and he hurriedly hid his phone, showing in a photo of the cabin we had rented last summer and suggesting, almost innocently, that perhaps at future family gatherings they could use it. For weeks, I had noticed the way he looked at it. It was not a fleeting glance, but a prolonged and almost obsessive fixation. He watched her carefully every time she bent down to pick something up in the kitchen, and I, at that time, only thought of an older man with strange habits, not imagining that this behavior would take such a devastating turn. Never in my dreams would I have imagined that the woman I loved could be involved with my own father. This man, who taught me to fish, attended all my high school soccer games, and even helped me buy my first car, had become the most unexpected traitor. The feeling of betrayal became even more bitter when considering the implicit complicity in his actions, as he was not only tarnishing his own image, but he had broken the unbreakable bond we shared. The morning of the incident passed with deceptive normalcy. Anne, who had the day off thanks to a 4-day workweek policy in her department, got up late and made a special breakfast: eggs, bacon, and toast, something out of the ordinary, but without raising suspicion. I, for my part, got up at 5 in the morning for my 6 a.m. shift at the factory, where I worked a stamping press. During the day, between the routine and some administrative inconveniences like when I remembered, mid-morning, that I had forgotten some important documents for a safety meeting and I exchanged simple, everyday messages, without either of us sensing what was about to happen. At noon, I picked up those papers and went back to work, unaware of the shadow of betrayal hanging over my life. The 15-minute drive to our apartment went without incident, proudly reminding me of how we had bought that modest apartment with the money my grandfather had lent me for the down payment, although the legal title was only in my name. However, upon arriving, something caught my attention. A silver car, identical to my father's Audi, was parked in the spot, with a mark on the same spot on the rear bumper that I knew well. With a mixture of confusion and growing unease, I parked and went up to the building, using my key. When I opened the door, the scene I found was surreal. A trail of clothes, both women's and men's, stretched from the entrance to my bedroom. Among those clothes, I recognized a pair of pants and a tie that I myself had given my father for Christmas. From the room, I could hear the murmur of voices, and I froze, my stomach churning and my mind flooded with disbelief. No, this cannot be happening. With almost forced calm, I took out my phone and started recording. First, I documented the clothes scattered on the floor, making sure to capture even the detail of my father's wallet, which had fallen out of his pocket. Then, I picked up the clothes and left them in the hallway, and continued filming as I approached the room, where the open door undisguisedly showed my father in bed within. The scene was so clear that any doubts vanished in an instant. The atmosphere abruptly tensed. Upon noticing the recording, my father began to yell, "What are you doing? Turn that off right now," as he tried to cover himself with a sheet. Without thinking, and letting the years of accumulated rage overflow, I threw a hard right hook to his jaw that sent him crashing against the door frame. Anne, amidst the chaos, could barely contain her screams, showing that her immediate concern was for him, and not for the betrayal that had been consummated before my eyes. However, in the midst of that chaotic scene, I remained surprisingly calm. After recording for about a minute more, I turned off the light, forcing both of them to react with a start to my cold statement, "You are no longer my father. You are dead to me. Go talk to Mom, because I will soon." I felt that each word reaffirmed the irreparable break in the family. I left the apartment without a fuss, picked up the papers I had left on my desk, and headed for the door. As I walked, my mind was torn between fury and bewilderment. When I got in my car, my hands were shaking so much that I could barely start it. For several minutes, I sat in the seat, trying to process what had just happened, until I finally started the engine. My phone started receiving countless messages and begged me to come back to talk, and my father, in an almost challenging tone, demanded a conversation like real men. Without further ado, I blocked both numbers. The way back to the factory was an attempt to distract my mind. Upon arriving, my supervisor noticed my obvious alteration and asked me, "Are you okay? You look like you have been through the ringer," even pointing out some drops of blood on my neck. During a break, I showed him the recorded video, and his reaction, a mixture of disbelief and consternation, confirmed what I already knew. I had witnessed something irreparable. The workday continued, forced into normalcy, until, at 5 p.m., I left the factory and returned to the apartment, with the uncertainty of finding new surprises. To my dismay, the house was empty. There was no trace of Unn or my father. Even the clothes in the hallway had disappeared, as if they had wanted to avoid questions from the neighbors. Immediately, I stripped the bed, removing sheets, pillowcases, bedspreads, and packed it all in a garbage bag. My phone kept ringing, with calls and messages, some even from my mother, but the magnitude of the betrayal had definitely settled in my heart. I had not yet read any of those messages, but I knew I could not bear it. So I decided to collect all of Ann's things and leave them outside the door. I gathered her clothes and everything I found that belonged to her. It took me about an hour, and with each load of her things, my anger increased. After being together for almost 6 years, planning the wedding, talking about children, where we would live, and a whole future, discovering that she was cheating on me with my own father was a devastating blow. I wondered how long this had been going on. Since we started dating? Since we got engaged? Did she talk about all this behind my back? 6 years of my life, wasted in the most painful way. Technically, I could not kick her out of the house, since the apartment was her place of residence too, but I knew she would avoid any conflict, and as long as I was there, she would probably stay at a friend's house, even with my parents. That possibility made my stomach churn. That is when I remembered the ring I proposed to her with, my grandmother's ring, which my father had given me when I told him my plan to ask him to marry me. According to him, my grandmother would have loved for her to wear it. Surely, my father was excited by the idea of seeing her wear his mother's ring while they entertained themselves secretly. What a disgrace. Without thinking twice, I sent a message to Ann's parents to inform them that the wedding was canceled. They had always been kind to me, which made the situation even more painful. Her father had helped me fix my car last summer, spending a whole weekend teaching me how to change the transmission, and her mother used to send me leftovers home every time we visited them. They were good people who did not deserve this disaster. The message was short and to the point. "I am sorry to inform you of this, but the wedding is canceled, and has been cheating on me with my father. I caught them together today. I have collected all her things. I would appreciate it if you would come and pick them up." With almost immediate contact, Ann's mother called. At first, she was defensive, not believing what I was telling her, but when I mentioned that I had the video, she was silent for a moment, and then apologized, assuring me that they had no idea, and that, of course, they would come to pick up Ann's belongings that same night. Around 9 p.m., I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, I found Ann's younger brother and her mother. She, with her face marked by tears, approached me and simply hugged me without saying a word. Then they went to the street and started loading the boxes with Ann's things into their car. There was not much to talk about in that shared silence. The next day, after trying unsuccessfully to contact my mother, I decided to go see her in person. After another exhausting day at work, I drove to my parents' house, going over in my mind the words I would use to face that difficult conversation. I thought about how to tell her, "Mom, guess what? Dad is sleeping with my fiancée." There was no easy way to put it. When I arrived, I sat in the car for a few minutes to calm down, and I noticed, to my relief, that my father's car was not in the driveway. I was not yet ready to face him without losing control. But suddenly, my mother came out of the house, furious. At first, I thought that maybe she was glad to see me, but it was not so. Her face, red and full of anger, soon transformed into a torrent of yelling before I got out of the car. I rolled down the window, and she began to insult me, calling me abusive, violent, a disgrace, and assuring me that she had raised me differently. I did not understand where all these accusations were coming from, until she continued. Apparently, my father had taken into my parents' house the day before, after I caught them together, and he had told my mother that and I had had a fight, that I was drunk, that I had hit her, and that when he tried to protect him, I also punched him. The nerve. The man who was cheating on my fiancée, and at the same time painting me as the villain, dared to do it. And I had the video to prove it. He seemed to think I would not have the courage to show it to anyone, but he was wrong. My mother, who had always sided with my father from my childhood to high school, even when I was right, reacted as expected. She slapped me and called me abusive, comparing me to the man she said used to beat her. She told me that she was ashamed to call me her son and that I needed help, that I should turn myself into the police. I was perplexed to see that my own mother believed that I had assaulted my fiancée. That is when I lost my temper and yelled at her, "Mom, your precious husband is sleeping with my fiancée. That is why I hit him. If you do not believe me, I have the video." Her face fell, and, taking a step back, she murmured, "What did you say?" I answered slowly, "Dad is sleeping with him. I caught them in our bed yesterday. I have it recorded." Still, she seemed reluctant to believe it, until I showed her the video on my phone. I watched her as she watched it. I do not know what was worse, having discovered them myself, or seeing the pain on my mother's face as she understood what her husband had done. When I turned on the bedroom lights, she lowered the phone and looked at me, no longer angry, just with a devastated look. "Mom," I started to say, but she, raising her hand, interrupted softly, "Leave, please. Just leave." So I did. As I left the car, I could see that she was crying inconsolably. I felt sorry for about 2 seconds, but after all that had happened, and her words, I knew it was time to move on. That night, I checked into a cheap motel, as I could not go back to the apartment. I needed time to gather my thoughts. I turned off my phone, unable to face calls or messages. The next morning, I called the landlord to find out how much it would cost to break the lease. 3 months' rent plus the deposit. A considerable sum, but it was worth every penny to get away from that place. I used some savings I had set aside for the wedding, and, in an act of self-care, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. My boss did not ask any questions and advised me to take the time I needed, one of the few advantages of being a reliable employee. I found another apartment in another part of town, signed the lease that same afternoon, and arranged for the move the following week. When I finally turned my phone back on, the number of notifications was such that it almost crashed. I decided not to return calls, only informed my boss by message that I would be present the next day, and turned off my phone again. After several days in isolation, I realized that I could not let what happened go. My father had to face the consequences of his actions. That is when it occurred to me that his own father, Grandpa Arthur, was incredibly wealthy. He made his fortune in construction during the 80s, built half the malls in the tri-state area, and then went into real estate. He lives in a lakefront mansion, collects antique cars, and embodies the typical elderly millionaire. My father, being an only child, was destined to inherit almost everything, as my grandfather had been preparing him to run the family business for years. Although my father works as vice president in Grandpa's company, everyone knows that he never earned it on his own merit. The real power lies with Grandpa, while my father only benefits from his last name. Something little known about Grandpa Arthur is that, despite his family loyalty, he had to cut off his own brother, who tried to swindle him in the past, appropriating a large sum of money. Since then, Grandpa has not spoken to him again in over 30 years. My father used to joke that the old man holds a grudge better than he holds liquor, but he always bowed down to him when it came to inheritance. I called my grandfather, and without beating around the bush, I told him everything that had happened. At first, he could not believe it, but when I told him I would send him the video proof, he was silent and accepted. Although I found it strange to send evidence to a 78-year-old man, I knew he needed to see it with his own eyes. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. My grandfather's voice, icy, asked, "Is this real?" I confirmed, yes. There was a brief silence. I could hear him controlling his breathing, and finally he said, "I will take care of this." 2 days later, while I was working and concentrating on not losing a finger to the metal press, my phone vibrated. I do not normally check it during my shift, but something prompted me to do so. It was a message from my cousin Matt. "Dude, you will not believe what happened at the club. Call me when you can." Matt, a member of the same country club my grandfather attends, that exclusive place with a golf course, tennis courts, and a restaurant where a hamburger costs almost 30, told me the following. During the usual breakfast of the club veterans, where my father was always present, Grandpa Arthur walked in with all his characteristic calmness and sat at his usual table. Suddenly, he stood up and announced in an authoritative voice, "Many of you know my son Walter. As of now, he is disassociated from my company and all my businesses. He has betrayed me in a way that I cannot forgive." The most shocking thing was what he said next. "My son slept with my grandson's fiancée. A man capable of betraying even his own son is not the one I want to represent my family or my interests." The room fell silent, and my father turned pale. After this, Grandpa sat back down and continued eating his eggs as if nothing had happened. I could not believe what I had just witnessed. My father watched as his reputation plummeted before the eyes of the local elite, which was practically a death sentence for his social and professional life. What happened next was, in a way, impeccable. Without creating a family scandal, my grandfather, an old-school man who avoids scenes, took matters into his own hands. He called his lawyer from Chicago, who spent 2 days rewriting his will and all the fiduciary documentation. He changed the locks on his office and deactivated my father's email and access cards. He found out when he tried to use his membership card at the club and was rejected. The manager handed him a letter informing him that, at the request of the main member, his membership had been revoked. When he got home, he found that his office at my grandfather's company had been completely dismantled. 2 days later, I received a call from my father. I almost did not answer, but curiosity got the better of me, especially after what had happened. He was clearly on the verge of panic, begging me to talk to my grandfather and assuring me that he had made a mistake, that it had all been an isolated incident, and that he regretted it a couple of times. "Go to hell," I replied. "You do not understand. He is taking everything away from me. My job, my membership. He is even changing his will," I reminded him. "Besides, behavior of that magnitude cannot be justified," and I ended the call, blocking his number. The satisfaction I felt was indescribable. Finally, my father was paying for his actions. A week later, my mother called me with news that left no room for doubt. Walter moved out. I kicked him out the day after I saw the video. The divorce papers have already been filed. I was glad to hear it, but there was more. It turned out that when they got married, my grandfather insisted on a prenuptial agreement that included an infidelity clause. This meant that my father would receive absolutely nothing. The house, the cars, the savings, everything would remain in my mother's hands. Grandpa always thinking ahead, I commented, surprised. My mother added that my father had gone to live with his brother, although he was not very happy about the situation. But at the end of the day, family is family, or so it seemed. In an attempt to see the human side, I asked my mother how she felt. Her voice, choked up, confessed, "I am surviving." 30 years of marriage vanished in a heartbeat. As for my situation, things have taken a turn. I got a promotion at the factory. I am now a floor supervisor, with a better salary, different hours, and a team that is still unaware of my drama. I decided to move to a new apartment in another part of town. Although the commute is longer, the change was just what I needed to start over. Also, my relationship with my grandfather has strengthened. We see each other regularly, and he is a great guy, with incredible stories. He even gave me what would have been my wedding fund, investing it in my future. At 25, my life has been transformed in ways I never imagined. At least, I do not want to end up like my father. Edit. Thank you all for the support and the awards received. I never imagined getting more karma on Reddit in 3 years of silence. Writing this has been strangely therapeutic. Edit 2. Please stop asking to see the video. I am sufficiently traumatized without having to become a distributor of explicit material. Update. Life keeps taking unexpected turns. Since I discovered the betrayal of my father and my ex, the consequences have been contundent. My father has practically been banished from this city. He lost his position as vice president, his membership at the country club, and almost all of his business friends. The divorce was finalized quickly thanks to the prenuptial agreement. So he got nothing. No house, no cars, no savings. Last I heard, he now works at a convenience store and lives in a small, rundown studio. I saw him at a gas station last week. He looked like he had aged 20 years, completely gray and in terrible condition. He tried to talk to me, but I just walked away. Maybe some other time, but not now. Meanwhile, my mother sold the house, bought a condo downtown, and we are trying to rebuild our relationship, albeit very slowly. It still hurts how she rushed to believe I was an abuser. As for my ex, she ended up moving in with her parents and keeps trying to contact me with excuses of having made a mistake. Every time she does, I change my number and block her. And to top it all off, 2 weeks ago she called me again, crying and confessing that she is pregnant, not knowing if the baby is mine or my father's. I made it very clear to her that I will never take responsibility for raising someone who could be my half-brother, and I immediately blocked her, warning her that if she persisted, I would resort to legal action. For my part, with the new promotion, the change in hours, and the new team at the factory, I feel that I can finally leave the family drama behind. Moving to another apartment, despite the longer commute, represents the fresh start I so badly needed. And above all, my grandfather continues to be my pillar, a man of principle, with a sense of justice that has helped me face this crisis. His support, along with the investment he gave me what would have been my wedding fund, allows me to look to the future with optimism. At 25, life is not what I imagined, but at least I know I will not end up like my father.